we need to talk about Project 2025.
He says, "You're not going to be a dictator, are you?" I said, "No, no, no. Other than day one."
Created by Trump's longtime allies at the Heritage Foundation, along with more than 100 other conservative groups, a 920-page document outlines conservatives' plan to rescue the country from the grip of the radical left. It means that if Trump is elected, the GOP would attempt to implement overreaching bills like the ones popping up in Florida, Texas, Alabama, and other red states federally. The document says the GOP will reach its goals by using presidential power to bypass Congress and by destroying what they call the administrative state, which refers to the agencies that try to ensure clean and safe air, food, water, drugs, and consumer products, and that also hold big corporations back from making more money. So that's what Trump means by day one. He plans to fire and replace tens of thousands of government employees who don't agree with him to elevate his power. And yes, he can do that.
First, I will immediately reissue my 2020 executive order restoring the president's authority to remove rogue bureaucrats, and I will wield that power very aggressively.
All right, let's dive into this document. When I searched the term sex, 133 matches came up. That's obsessive. It explicitly states their goal to rescind regulations prohibiting discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, transgender status, and sex characteristics. So queer people could legally be fired, not hired, refused service, or otherwise discriminated against. It also proposes deleting the terms sexual orientation, DEI, gender, gender equality, gender equity, gender awareness, gender sensitive, abortion, reproductive health, and reproductive rights from every piece of legislation that exists. That's terrifying because it promotes discrimination against LGBTQIA+ and pregnant people. And speaking of pregnant people, it also proposes pushing as hard as possible to protect the unborn in every jurisdiction in America, aka a national abortion ban. They plan to go after education too, just like they have in red states. The authors propose eliminating the entire Department of Education, which they say injects racist, anti-American, ahistorical propaganda into America's classrooms. As part of its economic policy, it wants to eliminate regulatory and procedural barriers for companies and prop up the oil industry, which it says is not an environmental problem. This is all just the tip of the iceberg. It's a document filled with endless contradictions, going back and forth between ideas of big government and small, going after monopolies but reducing corporate taxes and regulation, saying they're for freedom but policing people's bodies, gender, and sexuality. And it's a document created by the Heritage Foundation, which has ties to fossil fuel billionaire Charles Koch and is swirling with controversies. Throughout, they dehumanize the left in ways that make me afraid of how much more emboldened far-right Republicans will feel to target vulnerable people.
Hi, welcome to 2024 and Beyond, Creating a Shared Future Town Hall. My name is Abeni Bloodworth, and I am a co-founder of Chromatic Black, one of the many partners that have come together to have a conversation today about Project 2025. Some housekeeping. The frame in which we are operating today is in the spirit of our obligations as a 501c3. We're bound by a commitment to nonpartisanship. It is essential to underscore that our organization, and by extension, this event, stands firmly apart from political campaigning. We neither support or oppose any political candidate. Our focus is on the substance of Project 2025, policy recommendations, the implications, and the collective impact that it could potentially have on our shared future, not on partisan viewpoints or affiliations. Today's discussion is about understanding, dissecting, and constructively debating the policy dimensions of Project 2025. We hope to foster an environment where ideas can be exchanged freely, respectfully, and within the bounds of our nonpartisan framework. We encourage all of us to approach today's topic with an open mind, centered on the issues at hand, rather than political candidates. Chromatic Black is a narrative strategist firm. We're equity architects. We're powered by a collective of artists, activists across a spectrum of creative disciplines. We are thankful for our moderator today, Rochelle Ritchie, who is a television host, reporter, and writer, who has been featured on several networks, including Fox News, Fox Business Network, MSNBC, CNN, I-24 News, The Breakfast Club, Revolt TV, and News Nation Now. When I had a conversation with Rochelle about this idea of a town hall, what we also learned is her commitment to the Fourth Estate and the need for an ethical press, but also her deep, abiding love for this country. And so we thought that she'd be the best person to help us moderate today. So I'm going to sign off and send it over to my colleague and friend, Rochelle Ritchie.
Thank you so much, Abeni. Thank you for that warm welcome and introduction, and welcome to all of our panelists, as well as those that are in attendance. Now, I want to, before I introduce our panelists, I wanted people just to focus a little bit on the 4 pillars of Project 2025, okay? So their goal is 1, restore the nuclear family and protect children, dismantle the administrative state and return power to the American people, defend our nation's sovereignty and borders and bounty against global attacks, and ensure that we are able to have our God-given rights of living freely. What's interesting about that, though, is that when you look at Project 2025, it is truly anything but free. So we have a phenomenal panel that is here tonight that is going to help us dissect all of this. And I really want to encourage people to participate in this conversation. There is a Q&A box, so you can put your questions in there at any time. I will not get to them until the end of our panel, but I'll definitely get to as many as I can. So without further ado, let me introduce our wonderful panel. We have Monica Simpson, Executive Director of Sister Song. We have Teresa Bettis, Executive Director for the Center for Fair Housing Incorporated. We have Bruna Sollod, Senior Political Director of United We Dream. Anthony Torres, Communications Director for Get Free. Antjuan Seawright, Founder and CEO of Blueprint Strategy, LLC. We also have Nicole Ferguson Carr, investigative journalist. Mike Zamora, National Director of Policy and Government Affairs for the ACLU. We have Aklin Klondonker, Chief of Programs and Strategy for Demos. And last but certainly not least, we have Jennifer Flynn Walker, Co-Chief of Campaigns for the Center for Popular Democracy. So please welcome our phenomenal panel. It's a lot of folks, all right? So we have a lot to talk about. I first want to start with Antjuan, though. Antjuan, you wrote a op-ed that was actually featured in the Griot, and I took the time to read it, and I found it really, really intriguing. And pretty much it sounded like the message was that people behind Project 2025 are committed to an unapologetic vision of white Christian nationalism, and they don't care who knows it. And it's very clear they don't care who knows it because it's out there for the public, but it's 900 something pages. So really a lot of people are not reading it. What is the danger of people not knowing or understanding all that Project 2025 encompasses?
Well, first of all, Rochelle, thank you for your longtime friendship and for your vision putting this together. I'm eternally grateful for that. Look, this document, 900 some odd pages, written in 2024, reads like a document written in 1964, or in some cases, 1904. This unapologetic document that is a political GPS.
Sounds like we may have lost Antjuan, if I'm not mistaken. Are you there, Antjuan?
Oh, I'm here. Can you hear me now? Can you see me now?
I can hear you now. Go on.
I got kicked out. I'm sorry. This document written in 2024 reads as if it was written in 1964, in some cases 1904. It's a political GPS or guide for white supremacy, white nationalism, Christian white nationalism, bigotry, and hate, all implemented within the framework of the United States government. The reason why I'm scared as hell, as a 38, soon to be 39-year-old unapologetic Southerner, is the fact that the same things that they talk about in this document and some of the strategies they want to implement and will implement if given power are some of the very same things that my sharecropping grandparents fought against and would be trembling in their graves if they knew that these white nationalists are putting together a document for the public to see what they're going to do. Rochelle, the thing about this document that should make all of us sit on the edge of our seat is we slowly see it being implemented in real time at all levels of government. The presidential election, if it goes their way, will be just the final cap in a long pill of things they want to do. And that's why we should all be concerned. You don't have to be a Democrat. You don't have to be Black. You don't have to be anything to know that these things they hint at in this document will be detrimental to democracy and freedom as we know it. And most of these things are fundamental freedoms in this country that we, those of us of the African seed and the American son and daughter, have recently been able to enjoy.
You know, Antjuan, one of the things I wanted to also ask you before I move on to Aklima, why do you think that this is not getting as much national attention as it should? I mean, honestly, I watch CNN, I watch the networks all the time. I know that you are a seasoned and very experienced television pundit, but we do not see the conversation about Project 2025 happening as much as we should. And my fear is that is because people believe that it can't happen.
Well, there are a lot of, well, first of all, representation matters. And so if you do not have people who look like us or share those experiences or the consequences of a document like that, making the decisions of what goes on air, we'll never have these conversations. But in other regards, there are people who do not believe that these things are real. Mm-hmm. And so as a result, they think that this is just a simple document, the same way they thought that some of the things former President Trump said in the previous campaign was just rhetoric and it was just Trump, being Trump. But when those things are implemented and when they go further and when they're implemented to policy, then it's like, oh, hell, what do we do now? And I think that's part of it. The other part of it is there's so much noise out there that people sometimes do not always hear the lyrics. And keep in mind that Black folks in particular are the #1 targets for misinformation, disinformation. In our family, we call it lies. And so when you put it out there to our audience or to our community, there will be people who come along that will distract us with other things that are not as relevant to our future. And they want to put those things as priorities for us.
Thank you, Antjuan. Aklima, I want to move over to you. When you look at racial equity, what is your reaction to what you're hearing from Antjuan?
So what I'm hearing from Antjuan is that there is no space for racial equity in the contemplated future of a Republican anti-democracy. And I think that's very clear that what is lost here is that there are communities of color that help to build this country, that we have a Bill of Rights that is foundational to the humanity of our Constitution, and they are blanketly ignoring that in favor of their own practices and in favor of their own power. We are on the precipice of a full multiracial democracy when we know by 2045, there will no longer be a white majority. And people are afraid of that. And that fear is driving them to want to erase swaths of people that have every right to be here. So when I hear the question about racial equity, I automatically think about racial justice. I think about what it means to be rooted in history in this country and to be a part of a change that means an inclusive and equitable tomorrow. And anything less is not only an insult and affront to our Constitution, but to the very hands, the very blood of the people who did everything in their power to make sure that we have a country to be proud of as a child of immigrants, a place to come to, a place to arrive at, one that lifts us all up and says that we belong. We are now at the precipice of dismantling all of that because some bad actors feel their power slipping away, and that simply is unacceptable.
Do you think that Project 2025, a lot of people are looking at this from the lens of, okay, the upcoming 2024 election. But this plan, to me, seems as though it is something that it doesn't matter what happens in this election. This is the plan going forward, even down to your local elections for certain sort of conservative politicians. Do you find that to be the case? Because this, if I'm not mistaken, this plan came forward a couple of years ago, but now it's starting to get more attention. But should we have been paying more attention to it back then before we got to 2024?
To be clear, the plan to unravel a multiracial democracy has been decades in the making. If we think about the history of the civil rights movement, the modern civil rights movement, if we are looking back at our pictures that were once in black and white in the 1960s, we understand that there has been systematic efforts to block people from being a part of what this country represents. So yes, not a couple of years, but decades ago, but generations ago, there have been clear attempts to keep people of color out of this system that is designed to represent all of us. So should we have been paying attention? I'll say, how could we when people are starving? Because we know that the economy does not work for everybody, but for a slim few. So how can people pay attention to that when they have to feed their family, when they don't have access to things like clean water, when they don't have access to a voting site so they could cast their ballots equitably, so they can actually be a part of the levers of change that will allow for a better quality of life. So I don't think that the burden is on the people. I think the burden is on politicians, and it ought to be clear that it is up to them to ensure that they are securing the will of the people. It is not up to the people to answer for their bad behavior. It is up for our politicians to do that and clear the pathway so the people can be heard.
Mike, when you go through the document, the word woke is used quite a bit throughout it. And they really have this agenda where they call it the Great Awakening. And they're sort of attacking that. You'll see things about woke propaganda, woke extremists. How is the ACLU, which they might find to be a woke sort of organization, what is the messaging that you all are providing around Project 2025?
Well, thanks, Rochelle. I mean, we're looking at Project 2025 for what it is. It's a blueprint for a MAGA overthrow of the norms and rule of law that are supposed to undergird our country, with the purpose of imposing a permanent, theocratically inspired, white Christian nationalist, exploitative policy agenda. And so, I think that as we see this, there are, they're giving us their roadmap, and we need to be using it to be as prepared as we can be for the eventuality that the Trump administration returns or takes office. And I think the primary thing that people should understand is that as bad as things were in the first Trump administration, if they get back into office, what this document is showing us is that they have the ability and the plans to be a whole lot worse than anything that came before. So we had an administration last time that was really largely incompetent. There were a bunch of quote unquote grown-ups in the room who are trying to constrain the president's worst impulses at times, and they came in like completely unprepared to take office. They didn't think they were going to win. This time they have a 30-chapter blueprint covering every part of the federal government, with plans to impose strategies that would weaponize the government in order to be able to use power to hold power, basically to break the rule of law so they can consolidate their grip, regardless of what the people want, and then impose the sort of theocracy that means a Christian, kind of conservative Christian nationalist, as they define it, view of women's appropriate roles, bodily autonomy, how people can identify. They want to erase LGBTQ members of the community, impose gender norms of that adhere to their religious beliefs, and they want to erase civil rights and basically roll back the clock and impose kind of a gag order on history, and flip the whole notion of civil rights on its head to suggest that anytime that the sort of white privileged elites are losing any modicum of the power that they had, that's sort of the civil rights violation to be prosecuted. So it's a really dangerous situation. And now the other thing I would just add is that it wraps it all up with a complete unwinding of the kind of economic regulatory state to give free rein to the billionaires and corporations, And that's the payoff, right? It's you get the marriage of the economic elites who want to hold on to their little narrow slice of power and the kind of white Christian nationalist project. And this document gives them both something to go for. And so, sorry, it's a long-winded answer to the question about wokeness, but like the idea of what they're really, when they say woke, what they mean is anything that challenges the existing power structure. And they have, they're the MAGA, the Make America Great Again, means restore and hold on to power, economic power, social power, and political power for a kind of historically privileged elite who don't want to share it in a multiracial democracy. So that's what we got to fight for.
When you look at organizations like yours and Project 2025, if this plan were to go through, what does that mean for folks like you?
Well, I think we would all be busy. ACLU will certainly be filing a whole lot of lawsuits, and we'll be working in concert with our many allies and coalition to try to bring political power to bear. I mean, I think we have to understand, like, our tools are going to be limited. Like, no, we don't have a magic bullet. Maybe we'll win some lawsuits and prevent the worst of this from happening. But I don't think anybody can guarantee that a Trump administration would follow a court order necessarily next time. I don't think that the judges that the Trump administration has stacked the courts with will even follow the law as it's written or intended. So this is going to ultimately be going to require, if we will find ourselves in this situation, ACLU and all of us are going to have to be engaged in with every tool that we have at our disposal, including litigation, but including political organizing, mass mobilization, kind of making sure that the people who are in power in blue states and blue cities and places that are kind of willing and able to exercise power to resist, use those tools strategically, not only to defend people in the places where they live, but also to be a pushback on this administration and show a different way of organizing society around rights and justice and opportunity and equality, and fight this in the kind of hearts and minds and in the political arena, because ultimately, like, that's what this is going to be about. We're going to be in sort of if the Trump administration comes back and follows this blueprint, we are going to be in a like a death match for our rights and freedoms. That's how the ACLU is looking at this.
Yeah, and I think a key point for our audience is, and even for our panel really, is that when you look at this document, it's not just about who wins the presidential election. I mean, they are looking at staffing of the White House down to the communications department. They're looking at all of the different positions that encompass the executive office and saying, we need these kind of people in these positions. So it's not just about Trump, and it's not really just about who you elect to Congress either. It's really down to staffing. Monica, I want to move to you for a second, because I want to get into some of the specific issues. And I want to start with the reproductive rights and justice. And if you all were here and you saw the video that we played before, it is really shocking to see some of these suggestions of this attempt to go back to the nuclear family. Monica, just tell me some of the concerns you have about Project 2025 as it relates to reproductive health and rights. Is Monica here? Okay. I don't see Monica on the screen. So if Aklima is still here, I could go back to Aklima on that question, or if any of the other panelists that have already spoken or want to speak could jump in on that question, because I think the reproductive side is pretty critical when they are talking about banning abortion, banning IVF, down to the point of if you have a miscarriage, they will study your miscarriage to see if you actually took an abortion pill in order to criminalize you. Those are the sort of things that are under attack from Project 2025 when it comes to reproductive health. So do any of our panelists want to chime in on that?
Hi, this is Jennifer Flynn Walker from the Center for Popular Democracy. We brought a bunch of people to Washington, D.C. earlier this week because the Supreme Court was hearing the case on mifepristone and an abortion pill that you could take, medical abortion. You know, it's very easy, it's very safe. And there was hundreds of people on our side there. There was a small group, small group of people on the other side. And it was very clear that they were coming after, you know, it really is not actually about abortion. It's actually about, they actually had speeches where they talked about they wanted to have a society where women would have babies. And they are very clear that it's women. They, you know, don't understand that that people of different genders can have babies, but you know, women should only have babies, and that is the purpose of a woman in this society. And it is really horrific to hear. And it's not quite, you know, they don't go that far in the text of Project 2025, although they come close in Mandate for Leadership. They come pretty close, but the society that they're looking for. You're absolutely right that they're coming after IVF. You're absolutely right that they talk about, you know, a heightened criminalization of the life of a woman would be threatened. There's going to be a Supreme Court case heard later next month in April around emergency room access. So these things they're rolling them out now. And if we don't take action, and I know that we were going to save this to the end, but if we don't take action to stop the election from going in a bad way, and this is not a C4 conversation, but if we don't take action now, it will just be, we will remove any, they will have been able to remove any kind of protections that we have. They've taken the Supreme Court almost entirely. We have a little bit of a fighting chance there, but you know, this whole plan, Project 2025, is a book, Mandate for Leadership, and then it's an organizing plan around it of, they looked at how can they remove all of the bottlenecks that were in place last time Trump was in power, that stopped them from being able to do the horrific things that they told us that they would do. And if he is elected again, those bottlenecks will be removed. They figured out ways to do it, and they will be able to enact their full plan. And it sounds so like Handmaid, you know, people are always like Handmaid's Tale, whatever. And I'm always like, oh, don't be so hyperbolic. But the plan itself is scary enough. But the things that they talk about behind it, when you hear the authors in videos talking about the role of women in society, the plan mentions, you know, the structure of a family multiple times, many times, a mother, a father, and their biological children. They're very clear about that. So it's terrifying.
Yeah, and Teresa, I see you nodding your head in agreement as Jennifer is speaking. What are your thoughts on the threat to reproductive rights and health?
Oh, I think it's an absolute threat. And I started watching The Handmaid's Tale, and it is very scary because you see some of the actual things that are happening in that show that have come to fruition. And so I'm of the opinion that no person should tell me as a woman what I can and cannot do with my body. Beyond that, your spiritual beliefs of yours, right? But as a person, a woman should have the ability to make the decisions in her family. This is something that should not be left up to the government and the other individuals who are trying to impose their personal beliefs or their ulterior motives on us as women. So I completely agree with everything that Jennifer said. I think it's a much bigger piece than people understand. It's not just about Roe versus Wade. It's about how you subjugate women, right? And you take away that rights, and you begin to take us back to an era that many of us have not been privy to, but our grandparents and some of us, our parents have been. So it's just really time for people to take it serious. When you say a Handmaid's Tale could not happen, it absolutely can happen. And we need to be prepared for that.
Anthony, I want to move to you now, because sometimes when I look at reproductive rights and I look at the rights of the LGBTQ plus community, I kind of sometimes look at them as cousins in a sense, and I feel like they sort of bleed into one another. When I was reading Project 2025, it seemed to suggest in many ways that members of that community would no longer even be considered almost human or have any rights or human rights at all, let alone LGBTQ plus rights or reproductive rights or any kind of rights. But there was this sort of dismissal of their existence. What's your reaction to what you see in this document when it comes to that community?
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I think something to take into account is that what we're facing right now is a supremacist faction that's been here since the origins of our country. And this document is the latest remix of an old authoritarian playbook, and it's about control. It's about stripping us of our freedoms. It's about putting us in boxes based on what we look like, where we come from, what's in our wallets. And so for the wealthy white few who run this faction and who are behind Project 2025 and behind the agendas that come before it, they rely on creating racial, gender, economic hierarchies of human value based on difference. And that requires them to use laws, to manufacture lies, and to incite violence against people in order to divide and conquer. And so this plan that they've put out here is really also something that is coming out right now because they're terrified of our generation. When we look at millennials and Gen Z and get free organized as young people across race to reckon with our history and repair the damage that is still going on today, when we look at how young people turned out in a historic reckoning with supremacy in 2020, that spooked these MAGA politicians, these wealthy CEOs and operatives who are behind Project 2025. They know that our generation is already challenging their hierarchies and we have the power to rewrite the rules. And so now they're trying to fight any policies that create equality, because that, again, that manufacturing of division and the ability to control people and deny freedom and deny people the truth of people's humanity based on our genders, our races, our backgrounds is how they stay in power.
Anthony, I'm sure you probably heard me earlier say that, a lot of people are looking at Project 2025 from a federal lens. But obviously, this is really a plan to get anyone that can implement these sort of policies and this agenda in a position of power. How important is it for organizations like yours and even Mike's and a couple of other people that are on the call? How important is it for them to make sure that they are sharing this information and this agenda down to the local, to your parish, to your state, your county? How important is it for the groups like yours to make sure that they are delivering this message and letting people know that this isn't just about federal policies?
So we need to really reveal that this is a historic crossroads moment. And we've been here before as a country. And for organizations like many of ours here who are movement organizations trying to create positive change, we can also look back to our own legacy and history for answers about what we need to do now. When we look at the abolitionist movement that organized huge numbers of people across the country to mainstream the idea that enslavement was immoral and unconstitutional, that equality needed to be common sense, and we see how they created and organized people at scale to then make their leaders do what they needed to do to ultimately abolish enslavement and create Reconstruction, or when we look at the Civil Rights era, when we look at organizations that were formed to engage everyday people across our communities in taking sustained action to defy Jim Crow and to create ultimately the first semblance of a true democracy in this country, we have to actually get at the foundation of the harms that the threat that we see in Project 2025. And that means exposing this playbook, exposing the motivations behind it. What are the reasons why? Not just the what, not just the threat that is within this document. And so many people, of course, in our audiences already know this. They're either living it already or their families have been living through it for generations. And so we need to actually expose why this faction is trying to grab power now, why it's actually because they're afraid of us changing things and reshaping our country for the better and actually repairing the damage that they've done across time. And what we also need to be doing is advancing our antidote. We need to be for something and not just against this supremacy agenda. And for us at Get Free, we have our repair mandate, which we believe is ultimately the only way that we undo the lies, laws, and violence of white supremacy is by reckoning and repairing that harm from its foundation. And that means we need to demand that any leader who wants to represent us get on board and stand with our generation and stand up to the supremacist faction by standing with our repair mandate.
Anthony, I love that. We need to show what we are for, because I do think that a lot of people and voters out there feel like they are just constantly being reminded of what they are against and know what they're voting against, but we don't know what we're voting for. So very good point there. I see that Monica has joined us. Monica, thank you so much for joining the conversation. Jennifer gave a great analysis of the threat that Project 2025 has on reproductive rights, but I know that this is your baby and your lane, so I want to give you an opportunity to share your thoughts on Project 2025 as it relates to reproductive health and rights, and some of the things that we sort of went over as the ban on abortion, IVF, doing research on miscarriages to sort of criminalize women who have had miscarriages. So I just want to get your thoughts on that before we move on.
For sure. Thank you so much. And I do apologize for the crazy technical difficulty that I was having, but it really is great to be in company of so many folks doing so much amazing work. And thank you, Jennifer, for laying the groundwork for this conversation. And I think that everything that you just listed, Rochelle, is at the center of what we are actively working on and working against and trying to create new solutions for. Every time I think about this particular document, I am just, it brings up rage, it brings up sadness. Like, it is just such a scary thing to think about, that there are truly a lot of strategic efforts to diminish our ability and to just repeal and take away our ability to make our own decisions about our bodies, our families, and our futures in this country. And we can see this by them being so specific about wanting to really focus on reproductive health and rights in this so-called agenda of theirs. So my work is really centered on reproductive justice, and I want to make sure that folks on the call really understand how all three of these sectors of reproductive freedom work together, right? So reproductive health is, of course, working on the healthcare and making sure we have access to what we need for our bodies and to be able to have access, again, to all the healthcare that we need. Reproductive rights is that legal end of the work and making sure that we are advocating in all the ways that we can in the legal aspect of our work. But reproductive justice is really about bringing all of those movements together and connecting it to the very real social justice issues that impact the most marginalized folks to be able to actually make solid decisions for themselves. We understand in this country that a choice is a privilege. And we also understand in this country that even though you may have a legal right to something, or you may have an actual clinic in your community, if you don't have the economic backing to be able to get there or the means to actually access that, then that's where reproductive justice comes into play. And what we are seeing across this country is that there is a strategic effort to ban abortion. And we have to get to the real reason as to why, right? Why do we want abortions to be banned in this country? Why are they focusing so like intently on abortion? And we've seen this even before the fall of Roe with the Dobbs decision, right? We saw them really starting to tick away at Roe v. Wade in our state legislatures with personhood laws, trap laws, making this a racialized making this a racialized agenda also within their conversations. And so we have to get clear about what the root of this is. What is happening, and I think Anthony was saying this as I was coming on, there is a deep fear that our opposition has. They understand that this country is becoming more brown, it's becoming more Black, and it is becoming something that they are not able to actually take a grasp on anymore. And so what do? You try to control our reproduction. You try to make it so that more white women are having babies. You make it so that it is like making it clear that you want certain people to be able to grow and to be able to live in this country and certain people to not. And they begin to tie all of these things together. So we've seen this from Dobbs. We see this with the Mifepristone case that just went before the Supreme Court this week as well. Like they are trying to hit us from all different angles. And what I'm trying to make it clear to everyone about, whether you care about voting rights or economic justice or environmental justice or all of these different issues, they're all connected to our ability to make our own decisions about our bodies and our family creation, whatever that may look like for people and our futures. And so this work of reproductive justice is my baby for sure. But to me, it's also the crux of the work that we are all connected to. And I think this is what excites me about an opportunity like this, is for us all to see how interconnected our work is. That's an opportunity that we have so that we can actually build more collective power to come against these agendas that they're trying to put, because what they're banking on is that we continue to stay in our silos and that we continue to not build across our different movements and sectors in order to be able to have that collective and united front that we need. So I don't want to continue to like put out more of the things, but it's true. They are wanting to ban abortion. They're coming after IVF. They're coming after all of our bodily autonomy from LGBTQ rights and beyond, right? Because if they are able to control our ability to be able to make our own decisions and move in the ways that we want, then they're able to then move us in the ways that they want. And so we have to understand how critical this issue is, because we're in the fight for our lives, for our bodily autonomy in this country. And for me, as a Black woman, as a Black queer woman that lives in the South, who understands how all of these things are connected, I am very, very clear that if we do not center reproductive justice, if we do not center bodily autonomy in all of our work, then we're not going to be able to fight in the ways that we need to. But that also requires us shifting the culture of our communities to understand these issues differently, for us not to be scared to talk about these issues. I'm so proud of the abortion telling stories that's happening. I'm so proud that we are actually having more conversations around sex ed, comprehensive sex education, all of that, because the more that we are able to tear down those walls and the stigmas that we have against these issues, then we're able to build a stronger agenda against what they're trying to bring to us. So I'll pause, but thank you for the moment to just slide in and give y'all a little bit of what we're working on over here.
No, absolutely, because I think one of the things that I noticed in the document, that there was a criminalization that was happening within their reproductive plan. In particular, and I mentioned this before about the miscarriages and testing miscarriages to see if the person had taken an abortion pill. And when you look at the fact that 43% of Black women are more likely to have a miscarriage, that to me sounds like a little bit of a plan to criminalize women of color that are giving birth or have lost a child.
And that's exactly what they're doing, right? So it's like they're pushing, certain people to have more babies, and they're using the other strategies like criminalization to take out the other folks who are inevitably still going to get pregnant and have babies, right? Like they really thought about the ways that they are trying to come against all of our communities, but the criminalization factor is so real, Rochelle. We've seen this with SB 8 out of Texas. Like they're also giving, the green light to vigilantes to come after people having abortions. Now we're seeing this around miscarriage. We are seeing this rise of criminalization around pregnancy, around, all of different things. It's a scary moment for people. And what we're hearing from the ground from folks, especially now with Roe v. Wade being taken away in the way that it was with Dobbs, Folks are also just scared about crossing state lines, or they're scared about like, what can they do? What can't they do? So we're constantly having to combat the miseducation. I guess I'm stuck on Lauryn Hill today because I just saw her. But but we're having to combat, what a time for Lauryn Hill, let me just say that. But we're having to combat like all of this, you know, really ridiculous, crazy ways that our opposition is trying to flood, you know, our timelines, our social media with all this misinformation. And so we're constantly having to come against that. But this criminalization piece is something that we are constantly paying attention to, Rochelle, because they are using it as a real strategy to scare people. And when we're already dealing with the maternal health crisis, right? That's not helping the situation either. Like Black women are dying at a rate 4, 5, 12 times higher than white women in some places in childbirth. So we already know the burden and the stress that's happening on Black women, on women of color in this country, just trying to have healthy pregnancies to begin with. So now you're adding this additional factor. It's unnecessary, it's abusive in my opinion, and it's a very scary time. But this criminalization piece is one that they are going hard on because they know it's the way that they can lock up our people, scare our people so that they can continue to move their agenda.
And I definitely want to get into and I'm looking at the chat to our guests. I definitely see your questions in there. And I do want to get to the misinformation and disinformation part of what you mentioned, Monica. And I think I'll go to Nicole for that as an investigative journalist. But before I get to Nicole, one of the other key areas, so we've gone through reproductive rights, we've gone through racial equity, we've gone through LGBTQ+, immigration. Immigration continues to be, oh my gosh, I mean, we just cannot figure it out. It just on the left or the right. And when you look at this agenda, this is wanting to just stop immigration, even legal immigration, Bruna. So I want to bring you into this conversation to talk about the immigration piece that has been such a divisive topic. We've seen different shows talk about immigration and blame the current administration for the problem. And then you have people blaming the previous administration for the problem. But when you look at Project 2025, it sounds like they are attempting to get rid of the problem altogether by saying this country is closed. What are your thoughts on that?
Thanks so much, Rochelle, for having me. I really wanted to start tonight by acknowledging and mourning the 6 construction workers in Baltimore who were pronounced dead this week after the tragic collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge. Each and every single one of those men were part of the fabric that makes Baltimore a thriving, vibrant city, and they were all immigrants from different countries. And I think the root of your question is really about the lives of these 6 individuals as a reminder of the unseen care immigrants pour into our cities and communities every day, from Baltimore to Chicago to border cities in Texas. And so while we continue to mourn them and support their families, I think we all have a collective responsibility to make sure that our cities, our states, and our country are places that welcome and protect each other, including our neighbors and our friends and our loved ones who are immigrants, and that help to build the infrastructure that keeps us all together. And these are exactly the people that Project 2025 and Trump and Stephen Miller want to detain and deport. And I think Antjuan actually shared something really important at the top, that these plans are actually already in motion in many MAGA-led states. And I wanted to specifically talk about a bill right now, SB 4 in Texas, that will lead to racial profiling, mass deportations, and detention of our loved ones and neighbors. SB 4 would have especially devastating impacts for Black and Brown immigrants who are more racially profiled by police, by ICE and CBP. And so again, I think it's a reminder that the plans that they have outlined have already started. They are underway by Governor Abbott, by Governor DeSantis, by the Freedom Caucus in Congress. And I think an important connection to then Project 2025 is that when you read Project 25 and the mass deportation plans, mass detention, a lot of folks are like, there is not that infrastructure, right, to do that, because under the first 4 years of Trump, he tried to do that. And folks like the ACLU, many other organizations help keep that from happening. However, what we're seeing in Texas right now, these bills passing in Texas, bills being proposed in Oklahoma, in Kansas, in Florida, in Arizona, are so that they can then have the infrastructure. So if the Trump administration gets another 4 years, they can put those things into place. And I think the last thing I want to say to bring back to the connections, right? We've been talking about all of these different attacks. attacks on immigrants impact us all. Like I just shared about these 6 construction workers, they impact us all because we're all part of immigrant families. The immigrants are part of our communities. We live in mixed status families, right? And so when you talk about detaining and deporting immigrants, you're talking about American families and the impact that that will have for all of us to have the freedom to be able to move, to be able to thrive, to be able to stay in the places that we call home. So I think, again, it's really important not to look at Project 2025 and think like, you know what, we could stop that from happening, because the truth of the matter is it's already happening. And the attacks and the dehumanization of immigrants is so that when they win, if they win another 4 years, they could set those plans into motion much faster than they were under the first 4 years of the Trump administration.
Yeah, and how do you get people to see that threat to immigration? Because some people may say, well, I don't have a family of immigrants. Yes, immigrants live in my community, but I don't have a connection to them. How do you sort of get people to see why this threat on immigration is still a threat to them?
I think an example of the connection between ICE and CBP and the police was really real during the summer of 2020, when we saw major protests led by Black and Brown people in the summer of 2020. And the Trump administration was using ICE and CBP, like that infrastructure, to go after US citizens. And so it is all connected, right? Like, yes, you have ICE and CBP as a body, right? To only go after immigrants. But the truth is, they're really used to police all of our people, specifically Black and Brown people in this country. Black and Brown immigrants are disproportionately detained and deported under any administration, let's be real, under Bush, under Obama, under Trump, under Biden. And so I think it is important to see how Trump was able to use those entities and that police force as his national police during a moment where so many people in our community were risking their safety by going out and protesting the death of Black people by the hands of the police. And Trump, under his authority as president, was able to use that force that was created for immigrants to use after all US citizens. We have also seen that laws like SB 4 have been passed in other states before, right? We've heard about SB 10 in Arizona 15 years ago. Those laws have also been used to criminalize and racially profile US citizens and to wrongfully detain and deport US citizens. So again, yes, it is about the connections that we all have to immigrants, whether we know one or don't, but it's really about how they are, by removing the rights of immigrants to be able to live in this country in their chosen home, they're also tearing down our democracy and protections that we all have.
All right, great points, great points. I do want to move on to Nicole Ferguson Carr. Thank you so much for waiting. This has been a really great discussion. And you're an investigative journalist, and I do want to get into the education factor of Project 2025. But one of the comments that I saw in the chat, I do want to tackle now before we get to the Q&A. And that is primarily about misinformation and disinformation, because you can go and you can Google Project 2025 and you will get a slew of comments where you're like, you don't know what is real and what isn't. So how, from your vantage point as an investigative journalist, what is your advice to people to make sure that they are getting accurate information and that they are well informed?
So, and thank you. It's such a pleasure to join you all and to really see the similar themes. We're talking about the same things in different areas. And so when we talk about misinformation and disinformation, you've got to go back to the saying, we say the devil is the devil of chaos, right? And so when I saw chaos at the school board, which is actually a name of one of our series, you have to get beyond what's in front of you, the low-hanging fruit, to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. And I think a lot of times media as a whole, and I hate to say the media, because what does that mean, right? It means a lot of things, especially in this day. But journalists have a specific responsibility to get beyond the chaos, to get beyond the low-hanging fruit of language, because the expectation is that you adopt language to sanitize what is really happening. And so when we go, let's step back to education. And I think a lot like Monica does, we start from the beginning. So like life is the beginning, right? Public education and what we've seen in education, we have to remember this is a system that most of us will pass through, right? So we can't think about our coverage as journalists as I'm covering public education and policy in these ways. You've got to think about the shaping of America. These are the gates that most of us will pass through. What happens in the schoolhouse shapes the electorate. It shapes the way we think about America. It shapes the way we navigate it. We spend most of our formative years in the classroom. And so the education coverage, it begins to hit a lot differently when you think about shaping America. And so that's the first thing. One thing that I saw very differently in the beginning of, I'm not an ed beat reporter. I've covered criminal justice, consumer issues, investigations when I was in television. I fell into the public education sphere by coming to the newsroom as myself, as a Black woman who lives in the suburbs, who is a concerned parent of 3 children who were coming through the system, PTA card carrying parent, and I didn't catch the memo to come to the school board and say these things and act this way. And I wasn't seeing these things in the curricula. While media was adopting the language of the concerned parent, one thing that we very easily dismissed was that this was a white-led movement. That the concerned parent looked one way, sounded one way, and you could listen to the same message from the school board podium across the country. We've talked a lot about red states tonight. And so I went into a data project. We weren't talking about a red state thing. We were talking coast to coast, north to south, middle America. But what we were talking about was white-led suburban America. You were often not talking about a majority. You were talking about a loud minority. How do a few people get the policy? I always say, you don't get to affirmative action in the Supreme Court. You don't get to Black venture capitalist movements and the Fearless Fund case, right? You don't get to DEI and all of this, Harvard and Claudine Gay. You don't get to any of this without understanding the playbook at the school board level. Because this is about building a movement through language, through media. And so media, we adopted this idea that the concerned parent, that the conservative way of looking at things, we saw people acting pretty radical, actually. And we called this a conservative movement. We got to get beyond left and right and call a thing a thing. These white people following a playbook that we saw as we flipped at the Reconstruction, post-enslavement, we flick at civil rights movements, parental rights movements have come through all of these areas. And so I'm saying, a lot of people are asking in the chat, what about the messaging? And I feel like people don't know this thing. Media plays such a big role in this because we don't call a thing a thing. And that's not my opinion. As a Black person or a Black mother, or left or right or whatever, we see clearly what's happening in front of us and we sanitize it by language. And that is a part of misinformation. That is the part of disinformation. And they are counting on you to adopt that language rather than use facts. At Morehouse College, I teach a social justice journalism class. And the basis of this is that facts are non-negotiable. Framing is a choice. It's an absolute choice. And so when you choose to frame something, no matter what you see in front of you, you can do a data project, you can go and talk to people. None of the stories and investigations that I've done over the past 2.5 years on the parental rights movement have excluded anyone involved. Rule of thumb, if I'm going to talk about you, write about you, you're going to hear from me. It has everyone's viewpoint and it pulls back and calls it what it is. And we have to do that. And we must be historically informed because we have been here before. America is a very young country. There's not a whole lot we haven't seen before. We actually play by the same playbook over and over. And so to understand how we get up here with things, how we get to this movement, how we get to the minority, having such a hold over this, because racism, disenfranchisement, all of that stuff is about power structure. You know, when we talk about white supremacy or what have you, you don't have to be white to participate in white supremacy. You have to participate in a structure. And so we're talking about power dynamics, and what better way to mold, to shape society than to hit the schoolhouse. And so a lot of this, and I may be talking in circles, but I'm hearing a lot of themes from everyone coming from their center of expertise. We've got to be a lot more critical about the way that we're adopting language, how we're breaking things down, how we think about this idea of objectivity, right? I will say again, coming to the table as a Black woman, as a Black mom, as all of these things, how did you see like this organization in the school board? I'm coming as my full self, but we even have to remember historically, we don't have a full democracy without the Black press. When we talk about diversity in newsrooms, we're talking socioeconomic identity. We're talking about our backgrounds. We're talking about race. Don't be afraid to bring your full self to the table and your background to the table, because you can see things in a different way. And, you know, at the time, what were we calling objective press during Reconstruction? If you came to Earth from Mars during that period, and you looked at the front page of the Black press and the front page of the mainstream press was white press, you would be on two different planets, right?
Right.
So we're really good at atoning for our sins in media and hindsight. We do that all the time. We reckon with what we've done, and then we can participate in that same thing over and over. How dare we call something a concerned parents movement when we're not talking about people who even look differently? Like, what is that? What is that? We're not critical enough. We're not paying enough attention. And yeah, people have a lot to worry about. You have to survive. And that's where the chaos can distract you. And so our job in media is really to break things down and to really call a thing and not be afraid to be called biased or not objective. It's really about getting to the truth, because our first function is to be a first draft of history. And so we better get the right damn story.
I love that you said the framing. As a former journalist myself, I completely understand what you mean between facts and framing. And I think that there's also a lot of disinformation and misinformation as a result of the podcast culture. Sorry if you're out there and you have a podcast, but there are a lot of people that are self-proclaimed journalists that are feeding information that people are getting, and we sort of live in this microwave society where they put something on social media, it's 20 seconds long, and it gives no context to the issue. How tough and how do people get around that sort of podcast culture that has no real journalistic ethics whatsoever?
Mm-hmm. You know, if you find yourself reacting to fear and emotion in a way that just kind of clicks you on like that, like you might want to pause, because that's what it's designed to do. When I think about chaos at the school board and think about people yelling about things and threatening school board members, it's all emotion. And let me just say, think about if something looked different, okay? So for me as a reporter, I'm like, what if Black and brown parents were threatening to hunt you down if you don't do this at the school board meeting? We're beating on school board windows, and I'm taking scenes out of stories that I've reported over time. We would react to this a lot differently. What if it looked differently? So think about our emotional reaction to something, because a lot of times misinformation, disinformation works you up, because if you're worked up, you can't think straight, you know? Think about things that are being criminalized. Everyone has talked about that. One of the things that I get to in all of these stories over the past couple and a half years is like, so first this was this idea that we're going to attack the Department of Justice because they've called parents terrorists. Like, think of that. We want to dismantle that because we're being labeled something that we're not. Is that true? We want to get rid of the National School Boards Association and the PTA because they've got this agenda. Like, does that make sense to you? You know, what? And then we're at the point where we're legislating, you know, this break from the ALA, where we want librarians, not in schools, because remember, at first this was about kids accessing things in schools. How did we get to the point of trying to legislate felonies against librarians to allow people to check out certain material from public libraries? Like, if you really just stop and think and say some things out loud, then you see that it's not about the said thing in front of you. It's about democracy itself and dismantling things. And it's actually not anti-government, because if you look at certain issues like the school voucher situation, please turn to history and understand how we got segregationist academies. It was about school choice and taking public money and putting it wherever we wanted to without regulation. But I need to regulate something to allow myself to do that. So it's an anti-government message when you're actually relying on welfare to pump money into whatever it is that you want to pump money into. So that's about power. That's about saying what's okay for me and not for you. And so we just have to think a little bit more critically about it. And that's not being biased, it's just a fact. These are the ways that these systems are shaped. And then we have to understand that organization is in pursuit of a generational gain. What we do right now, and this is what the right has really understood for a long time, this is what the Daughters of the Confederacy understood when they were shaping public school curricula and books, that if I can shape this narrative and it sticks for this time, I can slowly, after generations, after generations, after generations, I can shape the thinking of America. All I gotta do is like make you see things a certain way. And then we go from there. So if we, and also I would challenge journalists, when you hear things, I used to always, catch a feeling when I heard someone saying woke on TV when I was in television. I said, please ask the governor what he means when he says woke, because it makes no sense. Like, what are you referring to? And now people are saying, oh, like DEI is being used like the N-word. We were there a couple of years ago and y'all just kept letting people say this thing and not define it. And so we sanitize language so easily and then wonder how we get to an extreme place where we're disenfranchised or feel a certain way. And it's the same way that it's the reason we have our historically Black colleges and universities. We needed this place, and look at what is being defunded in the public sphere, what's being dismantled in the name of divisive or racially divisive or unfair things. Like, we actually exist because we had to. We had to. And we've been underfunded, and there are facts and there's history to go along with this. And so I don't want to just hear about the left and the right. I want to understand how we got here. So we must be historically informed. We must not sanitize history. We must not sanitize language. And that is in pursuit of pro-democracy journalism, and something that we can look back and not atone for in the future, but say, hey, we did the right thing and we stood on the right side of history.
Absolutely. And I think that obviously having some curiosity as well, we have to be more curious and really educate ourselves on these subjects. Now, before we wrap up, there is one more topic, housing. You know, I was looking through this document, and the fact that they want to, in Project 2025, they want to eliminate the new housing supply fund, right? And this is a $35 billion fund to basically provide affordable housing. We are in a housing shortage. The rent is too damn high, is that one guy that ran for office in New York used to say. I don't know if you guys remember him, but anyway, he ran on the rent is too damn high campaign. And it still is, right? And a lot of people are not able to afford their homes. And so Teresa is here, as well as Andrea Fredericks, who is going to share a personal story about how she sort of was in a housing situation. And if it were not for programs like HUD, she might not have been able to find something that allowed her to live in a safe and health environment. So Teresa, when you look at Project 2025 from a housing perspective and what it means for people who are unable to find affordable housing, what are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I found out about Project 2025 from Abeni Bloodworth, and it caused me to lose sleep for about a month. I'll be quite honest. And as I began to look at this 900-page document, and I saw that there was a section on HUD, I immediately went to that because my primary source of funding comes from HUD, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, as a full-service fair housing center here in Alabama. And one of the first, I mean, there's so much in this document that I could talk about, but let me start first with something called affirmatively furthering fair housing. And let me say to all of my fellow activists and folks who are on tonight, that housing is at the center of everything that we have talked about. Because where you live determines your access to education, quality education, your access to quality lifestyle or life choices, your access to healthcare, good quality healthcare, your access to good quality food, right? All of that is around housing. And if you don't have a place to live that's decent, that's safe and affordable, everything else doesn't matter, right? And so when they talk about, we saw this under the previous administration where there were promises to not bother the Fair Housing Act. And what did they do? They went after the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule. And that's exactly what the AFFH rule says. It says that if federal entities and other agencies receive federal dollars from HUD, what we expect for you is to make meaningful actions and take meaningful steps to address the issues of segregation, of racism, of discrimination against the 7 federally protected class members, and that you will do things that actually benefit the community for all, right? And that provide access and remove barriers to those persons who have been historically marginalized. And so what do they say? Well, they want to do it again, right? We're back to the same place. They want to repeal the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule. And the reason you want to be concerned about that is because once they start chipping away at it, they'll chip away until there is no more fair housing laws. And Dr. King was murdered because of the work that he was doing around housing for Black people, for everybody having the right and the choice. That was part of that. His work in his last days. And then when we look at things, we talked about immigration, and I'm reading in here that they want to prohibit non-citizens and mixed status families. So maybe you are American citizen, but maybe someone in your family is here on a visa, or maybe they're undocumented. Well, you will no longer have access to federal housing. You won't be able to get any assistance in your housing needs. When we think about women and gender being a protected class, and they talk a lot about supporting and promoting those policies in HUD that would kind of almost reward people who are married. Well, guess what? Everybody doesn't want to be married. And so because they're not married, they shouldn't be denied the opportunity to get assistance with housing. How is that? Then not only that, they want to repeal all ideologies, anything around progressive movement that HUD has in place. They want to remove that. They want to get rid of the ability to be able to make appraisers give fair evaluations of housing. We've seen countless stories over and over again where people who are color or Black and brown homes are deeply undervalued versus that of a person who is Caucasian, right? And so things have been put in place to address that. But when we look at the things, for example, wanting to remove funding and programs that help the disabled who are chronically homeless, who have issues of mental health, who have issues around substance abuse, and doing away with those types of programs, to have a HUD no longer exist, and to have the Fair Housing Act be dissolved, and to take HUD apart, literally just look at how they want to literally take the whole thing apart, right? Then where will we be? And I wanted, that's a segue to Andrea, one of our clients. I want her to talk about her experience and what, as a person, if there had not been HUD, if there had not been a Fair Housing Act, she would have not been able, my center had not been there, my staff not there, how would she have been able to survive her housing situation?
Andrea, if you're there, we would love to hear your story on how HUD sort of, helped you when you needed it most.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Bettis. During 2022, I started experiencing some difficulty walking. And within a matter of 3 months, numerous doctor visits, I suddenly went from being active and healthy as a 53-year-old woman to suddenly not being able to walk. I was fighting several illnesses, including paralysis suddenly. Currently, I was residing at that time, I was residing here in Mobile, Alabama, in a second floor apartment. After all of the illnesses and the issues I was facing, I assumed it was going to be pretty simple to be able to switch over to a first floor apartment. My doctor sent a note requesting, and I gave that letter into our apartment complex manager. And at the time, she looked at me and she said, the only way you can get a first floor apartment right now is if you'll pay an additional $550 to $650 per month. And I looked at her and I said, well, I don't have that kind of money right now. And she said, well, all of our apartments are newly renovated, and the only way you're going to be able to get a first floor apartment is to come up with the money. And, being newly sick and I was facing so many issues, I'm going to be honest with you, I did not even pay attention to it the way I should have or would have normally paid attention to that matter. I was at home, and all of a sudden, since I couldn't get out, I couldn't get downstairs, I stopped going to my doctor's appointments. I stopped going to my therapist, and I should make note that I was in the hospital for over 6 weeks. So when I came out, there were so many follow-up appointments and therapist appointments, and I just stopped going. I mean, I fell into such a deep depression. I was struggling with, feelings of segregation and exclusion. I was literally clinically depressed. And one day, I spoke to myself and I said, this is ridiculous. I said, I'm an American. I was born in a U.S. territory, and I said, I've never experienced anything like this. There must be some help. Well, one of my neighbors in the complex told me, well, the fire department comes and transports a lady downstairs from building number 3, because she's also disabled in a wheelchair. And then I started calling the department for a lift assist. When I started doing that, there were 2 fire chiefs, because they would rotate firehouses that would respond to my call. And when I started doing that, both at different times, both fire chiefs came out and they met with me and they said, it's illegal for you as a disabled person to reside in a second floor apartment. And I said, well, could you please share that with my apartment complex manager? And both of them, they did. And I remember talking to one of the managers, and she literally laughed and scoffed. She was like, oh, the fire chiefs, they don't know what they're talking about. It is certainly not illegal. And I was like, well, what about the Fair Housing Act? And she shrugged it and she said, it's no big deal. But then I started doing some research and I came across the Fair Housing Center of Mobile. And as soon as I got in touch with that agency, they got me in touch with HUD. We filed a claim, and within a matter of, I want to say almost weeks or months, and Ms. Bettis, you certainly can chime in here. All of a sudden, I got the call from the same manager I had been requesting a first floor apartment from. And she asked me, Ms. Fredericks, are you still interested in a first floor apartment? I said, it's not even that I'm interested, it's such a necessity at this moment, and I needed it, to be able to resume life. I mean, at this point, I hadn't been to a doctor appointment, any of the specialists in months. And if it had not been for me getting in contact with the Fair Housing Center of Mobile and them in turn putting me in contact with HUD, I don't even know where I would be today, honestly.
And when you hear stories, and thank you so much for sharing that story. And I'm hoping that you are in better spirits and better health. I really appreciate the vulnerability and sharing that. And when you hear stories like Andrea's, and you realize that the Fair Housing Act isn't just about race, which oftentimes I think people equate it to, but it's also about disability. And I think that in this conversation, we have covered everything and almost everyone that can be negatively impacted by Project 2025. And so now that we have gone into the sort of the problems and the issues that present with Project 2025, I want to turn it over into solutions. And I want to bring Jennifer back into the conversation for this about how do we message, how do we get together, how do we find information, how do we help, what do we do? I saw this comment in the chat where, someone's saying, well, what do we do? And the first thing that came to mind was vote. That was the first thing I could think of was vote. But Jennifer, I want to give you the floor as we get to the close of our webinar here to just give us direction on where to go and what to do.
Thank you so much. I learned about Project 2025 from Anne Christine Dedesky, who I know is in the chat and watching this webinar. Anne and a few of her friends voluntarily read through Mandate for Leadership and digested it and wrote it into more plain speak, broke it down into chapters that we could all read. And you can read that and much more information about who's funding Project 2025, what are some of the plans that they have right now. They're literally copying the playbook from Viktor Orban in Hungary of how to be an authoritarian leader and take over the country. Anne's written some of that in the chat. So go to stopthecoup2025.org. And certainly you can learn a lot of information there. I actually am also learning a lot from Project 2025 and Heritage Foundation. They wrote a book, Mandate for Leadership, and they didn't say things like, oh, it's a laundry list. We can't work on all the issues. They worked on all the issues. We didn't even touch upon some of them here. We almost did. You said before, why are they coming after abortion access? The truth is they're coming after healthcare. I mean, Trump is right now on the campaign trail. In Mandate for Leadership, it talks about repealing the Affordable Care Act. They tried to do that. They had 6 times, we were very close to losing the Affordable Care Act. They want to come after Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security. Our side always says things like, well, Medicare and Social Security is protected because there's such a built-in constituency for it. And what they've been able to do, though, is figure out workarounds where they don't have to rely on Congress. So, Project 2025 envisions this theory or promotes this theory of unitary executive theory, which is that the president has a lot more power than we have normally prescribed the president to have. So yeah, unfortunately, because of unitary executive theory, it means that we do all have to vote. And yeah, we have 2 choices. And I know that there's, other candidates running, but ultimately, probably where you are on the ballot, there will be 2 choices. One of them, seriously, and, wasn't it Maya Angelou who said, when they tell you who they are, believe them? They wrote a book an 870-page book, and they said exactly what they're going to do. They're going to defund HUD. They're going to defund public education and move that into private education. They are going to come after, in very public and probably, pretty horrific ways, the LGBTQI plus community and immigrants. You will see camps. They talk about tents. They talk about tenting immigrants. And that is because they want to have a public face of the fight so that the rest of us, once they're in power, we're all distracted. We're protesting. We're with the ACLU, protesting over there, suing. We're doing everything that we can because there's these public attacks on these communities. And in the meantime, they've got all their people inside working in these administrative jobs, defunding HUD, dismantling it internally, taking away our healthcare, dismantling it internally. They are coming after the federal drug, the Food and Drug Administration. So we won't even know if our food is safe or our medications are safe. I mean, this is really about dismantling federal government. So, and also it's a big play for money. So what I want everyone to do, first thing is to do, vote. Second thing is sign up. I know that Julia's on here and she's going to drop into the chat a way for all of us to stay in contact with each other. Come back. There's going to be a series of these webinars that Chromatic Black is organizing. So come back. They'll be a little bit more focused on each of the issues. Recruit some friends. Do something, share this webinar, do a teach-in. You can contact the Center for Popular Democracy to come out and do a training for you. If you get 15 people and a room, we'll come out and we'll do a training about Project 2025 and about how you can take direct action to try to stop it. Shine a light on the fact that this exists. And we've got to do whatever we can to kill this agenda. And we have to also think about this as an opportunity. Right now, we have to get through this election, but we want to do it in a way where we actually build the progressive infrastructure to, for once in my life, be able to actually envision having a progressive president, the candidate that we really want, who's going to give us more healthcare, more housing, more public education, who's going to do something for racial justice, give us reparations, who's going to actually truly really take the extra step. Biden's done a lot, but take the extra step on climate so that we can save the planet. Imagine if we actually had the president who would give us healthcare and give us, social housing for everyone. That's actually possible if we build the resistance before it's too late. Last time, we thought we waited until Trump was elected to have resistance, and thank God we did, because, otherwise a lot of the things that are in Project 2025 would actually be the reality that we're living in, because he was quite successful actually in getting some of these policy proposals advanced. But because of us, because of people power, we were able to stop it. That's also something that you should talk about to your neighbors and friends and family, is that you lived through Trump before. And so a lot of people said, well, Trump, and, I don't like, Biden that much, or I'm not that excited about him as a candidate, or he's done some things that I'm, really horrified by, obviously. But the difference is that, Trump is going to literally take away every single thing that you want. You care about healthcare. He's going to take away the Affordable Care Act. Do you care about housing? He's going to defund HUD. And we have this little window of an opportunity to try to have a few places where we can fight back. And I'll turn it over to Abeni.
All right. Well, Abeni, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Hey, Rochelle.
Hey, so I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us. I'm going to turn it back to Abeni, but I definitely just want to take the time just to say thank you. And I'm so glad that I was able to moderate this panel. I've learned so much, and there's so much great information that's also being shared in the chat. So it's nice to see everyone in the chat communicating and helping each other out with where to go and what to do. So thank you again, and I'm going to turn it over to Abeni.
Well, we're out of time. It's 8:32, so we're 2 minutes over. I want to thank each of our panelists. I want to thank all of the organizations that were helpful in bringing together this convening. One, I believe that we have more power than we are aware of, that even though people want to represent that they are God, they are not, and that we have picked a winning team. So again, we're going to drop in the chat. We're going to do this monthly, so there'll be 6 more of these town halls. You have this group. If you got an invitation, it means that you were identified either as a community organizer, a movement leader, a media maker, a journalist, or a card carrying, or you have a card carrying voting card in your back pocket. So thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you next month.